Welcome back to a brand new explainer. Today, we are diving deep and neutrally unpacking the political playbook of Senator Pauline Hanson. Whether you're a close follower of Australian politics or you're just kind of fascinated by how populist messaging is built from the ground up, understanding her unique narrative is absolutely crucial. So let's break down her recent extensive interview straight from the source. Right out of the gate, Hanson establishes this high-stakes worldview with a really blunt claim. She says, and I quote, "We got 50% of our households out there on some form of government welfare. 32% of our population are foreign-born, so where's the patriotism with this country?" It's strong rhetoric, right? She's arguing that an over-reliance on the state and rapid demographic shifts are fundamentally eroding the nation's patriotism. Before we get into her proposed solutions, let's map out exactly where we're heading today. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, from business to politics. Then, lawfare and imprisonment. Third, Australia's cultural shift. Fourth, the policy platform. And finally, number 5, the political landscape. Let's jump right in. Section 1, from business to politics. You know, according to Hanson, if you really want to understand her politics, you have to look back at her roots. She heavily anchors her public persona in early hardships. For instance, she points out that she left school at 15, and she's quick to clarify that wasn't due to poor grades, but because of a cultural expectation back then to just get out there, work, and contribute. She talks about her father, who she says worked grueling 106-hour weeks in a fish and chip shop for 25 years. Just imagine that. And she brings up her own experience working 6 days a week as a single mother, building up a rundown shop over a decade. It's this specific small business grit that she uses to validate her political voice. And well, that grit fueled a seriously rapid and honestly chaotic entry into federal politics. It all started when she won a local Ipswich council seat in 1995. Soon after, she joined the Liberal Party for a federal run. But here is the wild part. Just 14 days before the election, she claims she was dropped by the party for criticizing what she viewed as identity politics around Aboriginal funding. So she stays on the ballot as an independent and pulls off a massive shock victory in 1996. She actually took the incredibly safe Labour seat of Oxley with a staggering 22% swing against a sitting member. Which brings us to Section 2, lawfare and imprisonment. Hanson describes this next phase as the absolute defining crucible of her entire career. After massive state-level success in 1998, where her newly formed One Nation party secured 11 seats and 23% of the Queensland vote, she suddenly became a major threat. From that exact point, she claims the political establishment actively colluded against her. She says they changed voting preference systems and launched relentless legal attacks just to stop her momentum. I want you to let that number sink in for a second. 11. That is the number of weeks Hanson spent in maximum security prison. It's wild to think about, but she uses this as a central pillar of her whole narrative. She presents herself not as your typical polished politician, but as an absolute outsider who was politically persecuted by the system. So how did she end up there? Well, she alleges that a political rival, Tony Abbott, organized a $100,000 slush fund, sourced from 10 donors, to explicitly target her in the courts. The charges centered around a super technical dispute, basically whether 500 individuals were formally members of her political party or just members of a support movement when the party was first registered. Now, she was initially found guilty of fraud regarding electoral funding, but her conviction was completely quashed on her third appeal. She looks back at this and argues it was pure lawfare, designed to eliminate her as a threat, even claiming she was effectively Australia's first political prisoner. All right, moving on to Section 3, Australia's cultural shift. Now, what's really interesting is how Hanson takes that resilient past of hers and uses it to diagnose what she sees as a modern cultural crisis. She draws a very stark contrast. In her view, the old Australia was defined by hard work, self-reliance, painting your own way. And she juxtaposes this against a new Australia. She characterizes this new era as being eroded by victimhood, identity politics, and way too much reliance on government welfare. Essentially, she's arguing that the nation has fundamentally lost its traditional culture. To back up this cultural argument, she breaks down the math. Out of an estimated 30 million people in the country, she claims only 10 million are full-time taxpayers. But wait, it goes further. From that 10 million, she subtracts 2.6 million government employees and then another 2.6 million people who are dependent on government contracts. So her conclusion? Barely 5 million private sector workers are holding up a bloated $250 billion a year bureaucracy, alongside millions of non-working citizens. Whether you agree with the framing or not, for Hanson, this math is literally unsustainable. Next up, Section 4, the policy platform. Building directly on that economic diagnosis, One Nation proposes some incredibly aggressive solutions. Citing a massive national debt of $1.5 trillion, Hanson is pushing for government cuts totaling $90 billion a year. That's a huge number. Where is it coming from? Well, she targets climate change departments to save an alleged $30 billion by totally ending net zero goals. She also aims to slash the NDIS back to its original scope of roughly 410,000 people. And she wants to completely dismantle Aboriginal-specific departments. Her goal there is to strip race out of government policy by shifting entirely to individual, needs-based funding. On the broader economic front, she tackles the housing crisis head-on. She claims that taxes make up an unbelievable 44% of building costs right now, so her proposed solutions are quite dramatic. She wants to halt mass migration and ban foreign investment to immediately increase housing supply, and she even suggests eliminating the GST on housing products for 5 whole years. Culturally, she doesn't stop there. She also proposes defunding public broadcasters like the ABC and SBS, forcing them onto subscription models so they aren't relying on taxpayer dollars. And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, the political landscape. Looking at the current political chessboard, Hanson argues that traditional working-class voters are actively abandoning the Labour Party. Why? Well, she attributes this to high inflation, a claimed 300% rise in electricity costs, and a perceived shift toward extreme left-wing cultural policies. Because of this, she sees a massive opportunity for One Nation. She believes her party can capture young people who are fed up with what she calls university echo chambers, as well as women who are deeply concerned about their families' economic futures. So, looking ahead to the 2028 federal election, her strategy is actually very specific. She aims to win just enough seats to hold the balance of power. But here is the kicker. Rather than seeking a formal coalition or cushy ministerial roles, she wants to offer confidence and supply to a conservative government. Basically, that means she'd support a minority government on key votes like budgets without joining the cabinet. This would allow her to judge every single piece of legislation strictly on its merit, effectively giving her veto power to drag the government's agenda toward her own policies. It's a really calculated move. As she continues to gain traction in the polls, the crucial question this interview leaves us pondering is this: has the nation's culture fundamentally fractured under economic weight, or have populist narratives simply resonated more loudly in today's climate? Hanson changed, or, as she claims, has the electorate simply caught up to her? It's a completely fascinating dynamic to watch unfold. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the politics around you. Catch you next time.